So I've just finished episode 17 of Fruits Basket, and wow, I swear every week I say that the latest episode is my favourite episode of the season, and this week is no exception to that. It was really a refreshing change of pace compared to the past few weeks. Recently, a lot of the episodes have had a far more serious tone and have heavily focused on personal issues and tragedy and trauma that surrounds the Soma curse, but this episode sort of flipped that on its head. It was more lighthearted in nature, filled with jokes and humour, and had a lot of romantic undertones and subtext. We weren't getting bombarded with sad moments and tear-jerking backstory, and I think that creates an interesting contrast and really helps this episode stand out from the pack. So, that being said, let's get to the episode. We start off the episode with a short scene with the gang in the middle of a bamboo forest on their school trip. The beauty of the place inspires Hanajima to recite a haiku, with the catch being she doesn't seem to understand what a haiku is. Toru tries to help her out with a haiku of her own, but she also doesn't seem to be able to grasp what it involves either. I think this scene really sets the stage for what the episode's meant to feel like. A very light-hearted pit stop to give the audience a break and prepare them for what's to come. After the intro, we get a flashback to just before the school trip, where Yuki reminds Toru and Kyo that the trip is imminent and realises that they'd both forgotten it. So here we can see that the episode's already starting to pair them off to set the stage for later events of the episode. Kyo says that he isn't looking forward to the trip, which awakens angry Shigure, who has a hilarious meltdown about Kyo squandering the potential for romance on the school trip. I really like how they always sort of hint that Shigure's puppet mastering all the Soma's lives in one way or another, pushing them to start to rebel against Akito for his own agenda, but masking it under being kind of creepy or silly. I think it's really strong character building and it's being done in a really unique way. We then transition back to the school trip where a bunch of students are oogling a couple as they walk off together, wishing that they could also get a romantic confession on the trip. Toru notices Uotani seems a bit down and thinks about how she hasn't told her about Kurono yet. I like this little moment a lot because it shows that life isn't just standing still. All characters, big or small, have their own struggles and story arcs that they're working through, and it just shows how the story's beginning to become more complex and interweave plot threads really well. The group then wonders why Yuki isn't being bombarded by girls, and it's revealed that his creepy fan club is still at work protecting him from the shadows. He then notes that Kyo's gone off with some girl that wanted to talk to him, and a bunch of students run off to spy on them. Toru seems to want to follow them, but Yuki tells her not to worry, and that Kyo won't accept. At this point, even Yuki knows it. The one true ship is Kyo and Toru. Onto Kyo, he harshly rejects the girl and then is attacked by his crying friends who berate him for being mean and kind of steal the show with their antics and despair at not being as cool as Kyo. Kyo simply responds that he shouldn't have to be nice to people whom he has no interest in. When Kyo returns to the group, he acts rude and dismissive to Toru, and thus Yuki, acting as a mouthpiece for fans everywhere, bops him on the head and finishes him off by calling him an idiot, putting him in his place and reminding him he needs to be nice when he actually likes somebody. We then transition scenes again and find Toru alone in a gift shop, realising she's lost track of her group. She panics and then runs into Kyo on a bridge with a cat pawing at him. After ignoring it for too long, the cat gets frustrated and attacks him before leaving, whilst he tells Toru that he can't be nice to everybody. Toru then wonders if one day he'll behave like that to her and let her go. Not much to say about this other than obvious foreshadowing alert. Then, she grabs his shirt, he turns and grabs her hand, and we have the most intense kiss-me-eyes stare-down moment that the show has ever had before. They really did lay it on quite thick this episode, but I think it was kind of necessary, especially since we haven't really seen too much of them together since the end of the beach arc. We then shift POVs from Toru to Yuki, and we have a funny little scene where Yuki's sleepwalking in front of all the guys in his class, revealing his clumsy side to people who haven't seen it before. This scene to me is very much a representation of Yuki coming out of his shell, and even though he wasn't consciously aware at this point, it's more just a visual representation of how far he's come. We also get to further explore his friendship with Kakeru and how that's helped define his character in the latter half of the season. I think the most key moment between these two is the scene by the river, where Kakeru inquires about Toru once again, which gets Yuki's attention. Kakeru then baits Yuki by saying he might have a crush on her and he wants to get to know her a little better. Yuki responds that if that's true, it's not really his business, but that if Kakeru hurts her, he couldn't forgive him. He then has a little vision of Kyo, which kind of implies that he realises Kyo and Toru had a thing, and obviously he'd hate Kyo if he hurt her. But beyond that, I think it says that he's open to improving their relationship, considering the only thing he finds unforgivable is hurting Toru. To me, it implies that he can move past all the anger that they've had towards each other for so long, and try to become friends in the future. Kakeru then asks what he'd do if he hurt her, and Yuki replies that he wouldn't be friends with him anymore. A sentiment that Yuki immediately regrets because he thinks it sounds childish. I actually really liked this little joke because it made a lot of sense. Yuki was confined for a big portion of his life and that would have stunted his social growth quite a lot. For him to say such a childish thing like that to a friend in an argument makes sense and to me is an example of really understanding how trauma can affect a character's personality. This sequence then devolved into one of the most hilarious portions of the episode where Kakeru has a tantrum and embarrasses Yuki to the max. Yuki then reflects on how he's made some happy memories on the trip and hopes that he remembers them fondly before catching a red leaf, which turns into his souvenir that he gives to Machi. So, evidently, that's the new Yuki ship. All aboard. We finished up the episode with Kyo and Toru, where Kyo notices that Toru's made a cat figurine to go with the other Zodiac figures she bought. Of an episode of touching moments, this was the cake topper for me. It's just a shining example of how to her, he's not an outsider, and he's no different than anybody else. I really don't have much more to say than that. This season is becoming better and better with each passing episode, and I'm looking forward to next week and hearing what you guys think.